Hi guys, Andy N, Spoken Label, back in the house on a Sunday evening. Need to state today before we start, there is fireworks going off in the background at the moment. So it's not bonfire night, it's just local feral youth letting them off left, right and centre. So if we get a bit of background noise tonight, I do apologise. Now, we're over to America today, where hopefully this gentleman won't have that problem with fireworks I'm talking to. But I've got a wonderful gentleman with me here, and I have really, really enjoyed his book in the last few days. Originally from the Kansas City area, but now Northern California. And it's a wonderful gentleman called Ed Davis. Now, Ed, obviously, before we get on to your book we're here to talk about today, tell us a bit about yourself, first of all, as a person. Where did all your creativity come from?
Wow, that's a great question. And I'm not sure anyone ever understands exactly where their creativity comes from. For me, I think writing has been a desire to share. I think that's, to want to take experiences and capture them and share them with others. I think that's where the biggest piece of it's come from. My best creative writing probably started writing as letters to my wife, who has been married to me, thank God, for 46 years now.
Actually, really? Oh, wow, mate. Oh, well done, mate. Well done, mate, with that.
Yeah.
They definitely say you get less for murder nowadays. Yeah. My mother and father have been married now for 51 years, so that's
fantastic.
It's an excellent achievement. I'm well done for you, mate, straight away. So.
Right.
So, do you say obviously you first started writing your letters to your wife, and really wasn't it? So,
yeah, I started writing freight trains when I was very young. I needed actually to go to the UK with a friend, and I was in a new relationship with Jan. And I had discovered seeing the country riding freight trains basically across Canada. And somehow I was writing letters every chance I got to this woman I was in this new relationship with. And I had this new way of seeing the country. And I brought those things together in the letters, and it was sort of like alchemy. It created something new that I wanted more of. And so that was really when I knew I wanted to be a writer.
Yeah, no. People, obviously, we're talking about your book today. We have to jump straight into this, basically, because we've kind of led straight into it, which is great. Now, it's your book called The Last Professional, which is about those sort of days. Because I've read interviews already where you've basically saying this book's been building for 40 odd years, really, hasn't it? So, yeah, did you know? Obviously, when you went onto these freight trains at the time, 40 years later, you were bringing a book out about it.
Had no idea. It's just there was something sort of mesmerizing to me about seeing the country that way, and I knew I wanted to capture it. I was riding at the time of the very last of the old time hobos, the guys who had been riding in the steam days, and I could see it was a vanishing way of life. And so I knew I wanted to capture that I was experiencing. And it was also a great backdrop for a story, a real drama about characters confronting their past and clinging to their vanishing way of life. So I started it in a boxcar about 40 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry, mate, I'm interrupting you.
Yeah.
No, but people read the book, and it's a fascinating book. It really is. You can see, even though it's one of those sort of books where it is fiction, but you can tell it's fiction, but also it's the backdrop of it is you can tell that you've lived it straight away with that. So, what got you into wanting to travel on the freight trains in the first place, and like that?
That's a good story. I was very young. I was 17 when I went to work at the largest hospital for the developmentally delayed in the United States. I was a psychiatric technician. A good friend from high school was also doing the same thing. We shared in common that we did not know our fathers. And he got a line that he might be able to find his dad on an island, the Isle of Mull, off of Oban, up off in Scotland. And so we said, we'd worked for 2 years at the state hospital. We cashed in our chips. We said, well, let's go see if we can find your dad. And so we got round trip tickets from Kennedy to Heathrow, $200 open-ended tickets. Those were the days when you could do that. But we were going to need to get to Kennedy. We had to go across the United States. We figured we'd hitchhike. It was 1972. Everybody was doing it. I'm a big guy. I'm 6 foot tall. Paul was 6'2". or 4. We got great big Army surplus backpacks. We filled them up with everything. We stuck our thumbs out, and nobody stopped to give us a ride because we were too damn big. We wouldn't fit in their cars. And so finally, a guy in a van stops and says, "You guys are crazy. Why aren't you riding freight trains?" And he might just as easily has suggested that we ride magic carpets. I mean, it wasn't something that we'd ever even considered. He had done it, and he gave us some pointers, dropped us off at a freight yard up in Southern Oregon. Half an hour later, we were on a flat car heading north, wind in our hair, sun in our backs, and just
Fantastic.
fell in love with it at that point.
Oh yeah, completely. Now, I don't want to go into, obviously, I want people to read the book themselves, but obviously I have to ask you about the two major characters, obviously, Lynden Hoover and the Duke of the Duke himself. Now, did you both were these kind of based on real people, or the like amalgamation of people in hindsight?
Yes, as we discussed before we started, I think the best fiction is always at some level autobiographical. And so Lyndon is based largely on aspects of my life. He did not know his father. I didn't know mine. He was abused as a kid. I was abused as a kid.
Oh.
The Duke is an amalgam of these old guys, the very last of their type, who were still clinging to this way of life. Freedom, wanderlust. They lived to be moving. They were never more themselves than when they were on the go. And
I thought so, yeah.
Yeah, so that's who these guys are.
Yeah, I thought so straight away. That's what to clarify that people and make people aware of it. That's why it gives it the richness in the book straight away. Now, it's unusual, this book, because you had quite a number of grayscale images coming in and out of the book, which I think it's one of those sort of things that either works or doesn't work. And it worked really well for me. So
Right.
give it that sort of, back in those days, in contrast to nowadays, it is much more, I could argue, a grayscaled existence, really, you could argue.
Mm-hmm.
But where did the idea for putting the images into the book come in? Because
Well,
there's about 16 of them, isn't there, throughout the book?
yeah, yeah. The books that really formed me as a writer are American fiction from 100 years ago. So it's
Hmm.
Hemingway, it's Fitzgerald, it's Steinbeck. A little later,
I love Steinbeck. Love Steinbeck. Yeah.
as you can tell, there's influences in my work. And many of those novels were not graphic novels, they were fiction novels with illustrations.
Hmm.
That was reasonably common 100 years ago. My favorite among them was the 1930 Random House edition of Moby Dick, which was illustrated by Rockwell Kent. They were all woodcuts, and they're just magnificent. You can actually just look at the illustrations and not read a word of the story and understand what's going on. So I decided I wanted to try to do that, to bring that back in this novel. I went online and looked for someone who could emulate that style. I found a fellow in the UK, Colin Elgin.
Ah. Yeah, I
And
noticed it mentioned a UK artist. That's why. Yeah.
yeah, and it's sort of a happy accident. I described some scenes to him. He got back to me with an example that was just great. He's done 17 illustrations plus a couple of covers. It was only after that that I discovered he'd worked for the design firm Hypnosis in London and done Dark Side of the Moon, done the covers for all of the albums we grew up with as kids.
Wow.
He got
Wow.
out of the album business and now he does novel illustrations. So really special. He's a great guy and the illustrations are just wonderful.
Oh, they're wonderful. Really, really are wonderful. They add something to the book. It gives it that sort of, like I said, takes you back in time, definitely. I think they're really excellent stuff. Now, I want to ask next, and I told you about this before, because I saw the beat influences in this book to a degree, as well as Hemingway and Steinbeck as well, where you had like, I loved it where you had, the book itself obviously is full of chapter like all books are, but you had them in between some of the chapter, you're calling them tracks,
Right.
which is like, I found it really, it was unusual, but I think it worked really well. So tell us about where the idea to come along. Obviously, doing chapters, then you had tracks coming in, and they were like telling different, looking at things in different ways. They were. So, what was the idea behind that then?
Well, my approach originally was I saw these hobos, these old professional hobos, as being almost mythological characters, like American mythology or archetypes, and
Hmm.
so I wanted to try to get to what's the what's the core of why these people do what they do. What's their
Hmm.
life like? What are the sacrifices they've made, and what do they gain from it? And so they're what are called the tracks are really a series of interviews between an unidentified interviewer and someone who is obviously an old professional hobo.
Yeah, I got that. I
They're,
got that. Yeah, it works really, really well.
yeah,
That's why. So,
and the interviewer is asking the probing sort of questions that might not come up in the regular flow of the novel narrative. But it's what have you sacrificed? What have you gained? What do you miss? And so it's a chance for the reader to enter that lifestyle in another way, to get another perspective on, what's it mean to sacrifice your life to wanderlust? What do you gain and what do you lose?
yeah, it really works well. That straight away with it. Was that a technique you had planned from the beginning of the book, or did that come later on?
I planned it from the beginning,
Hmm.
and it was. If you've read, it's probably been a long time, but the Grapes of Wrath has
Oof.
intercession chapters. It has
Yeah, it does.
little pieces between the chapters, and I always found those a great way. It was another perspective on the time and the place, and another way to get a handle on what those characters are living through. So it's not directly part of the narrative, but it influences and informs it. And so I always liked that. Um, as a writer yourself, you appreciate this. The book went through many editors. I worked with a
Ah,
lot of editors,
I
and
was I was wondering along those lines because it felt like it had gone through that sort of stage where I felt it had been wrote over years, and that probably explains
yeah.
why. So,
And so I had an agent working with an editor in Hollywood who was trying to put it together for a film,
oh,
and
whoa,
that
whoa,
editor got rid of all of the track stuff. All went away,
oh my
and
God.
and so it got cut down, and the book's name actually got changed to The River of Steel. It was very short and tight, and it was just a thriller, basically. So I ended up really with two novels. I had The River of Steel, which was this short, tight thriller,
Hmm.
and then I had The Last Professional, which was more like the book I wanted to create. And I finally hooked up with a magnificent editor. I can't overstress the importance of a good editor. And we finished another large project together. And I said, Zook, I've got these two books. I'd like to put them back together. And so that's what we did. We knit them back together into the book that you see now.
Oh no, yeah, it does. It feels like it. It's some books you can read them. I'll just made it. I'm sure you won't disagree with. You can feel like it's a life's work. And when I was reading, I knew straight away it had been a life's work for you straight away. And it's like you said it yourself. It's gone for a number of editors where,
Yes.
I think it probably was just. Do you think it was more in hindsight? It's more look. Sometimes a good judgment. You found the editor you're after going for somebody, but
Yes.
not so great editors. And that's the best way to put it to you for your book, right?
Yeah, I think you've got to open yourself to the notion that there are different types of editors. Some are pretty good at telling you what doesn't work, but finding an editor that will tell you what does work and will help you see the things you didn't do but could have, that's the value. And yeah, so for anyone who's listening who is a writer, find a good editor, and once you do, hang on to them because
Yeah,
they're very
hang on
rare.
to them by the neck. Yeah, don't let it go.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I also liked as well the use of the epigrams in the book as well. I thought that was incredibly striking. That was. Did that come straight from the beginning of the book as well? Did it?
I actually added those later,
Ah,
and it was an effort again to give the reader a different way to access this lifestyle. Uh, Hobos were often poets. They were storytellers, and so many of the epigrams are actual stanzas, often from anonymous hobo poets and singers. And so it was a way to influence, another way to look at what this life looked like, and another way in for the reader.
right. Yeah, you can tell. Like I said, I was on a heart point. I can see what you're getting at straight away with that. So, yeah, it does. It works really well. It's added that extra layer to it, really, didn't it? So, yeah,
Yeah.
I can agree completely with that. Now, obviously, when the book was done, obviously, well, before you bought it, I know you did it. You've done the audiobook version of it yourself as well, which I
Yes.
think in some ways I find it quite unusual doing it yourself because usually, obviously, you get. My wife's obviously done. She's had several books out on Audible because she's
Oh
a
yeah.
novelist. She's a novelist as well. She's done about 7 novels, and she got other people to read out her novels for her, and most. funnily, and this one will make you laugh. She bought quite a violent zombie novel out, and she ended
Okay.
up with we think it was a 15-year-old girl actually reading out doing the actual audio version of it. And we
Oh
guessed
wow.
we guessed she must have got permission of her parent to for all the bad language and the violence that was in it. But was it always planned for yourself, Ed? Obviously, like to do the audio version of it yourself, then was it?
Not at all.
Ah,
I do like to read. I mean, as I said earlier, one of the
mm,
reasons I write is I like to share and I like to read my work to other people. I'm a backpacker. I backpack here in the Sierra Nevadas every summer when I can, and I'll
mm.
often take a work in process and around the campfire at night, read a chapter or read a short story. And so I have a reasonably good reading voice, and I know the material. And as it happened, I knew the engineer and the recording studio very well because I've been in a music group for about 30 years and they did a CD for us.
Wow,
So
wow.
I trusted him, and over a 3 day period we recorded it. It was a really singular experience.
Yeah, I think it does the bit extract I've heard is you've got a very, very rich voice. People can hear that from talking to you today. You've got a
Right.
really good voice, and when you hear the audiobook version, yeah, it's excellent. Really is
Yeah.
excellent on it. So what
Thank you.
straight away with that, so I could see you straight away reading that. But I haven't come across many people that do it actually.
That's true.
The only one I've heard that does it is News and Neil Gaiman. But again,
Hmm.
he's absolutely just
Oh,
gigantic. So
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. He
that's
can
when
do anything.
yeah, exactly. And he does, right? So with that one straight away. Neil, if you're hearing
Yeah.
this, come on, come on spoken label,
Yeah.
please, right?
Oh, he'll be glad to talk to you, I'm sure. Yeah.
Now, obviously, I said for also as well, obviously in promotion with the books, the book come out a couple of months ago, really now. I know you did a tour back in April, didn't you? Back in
Yeah.
2022 on this. And it looks like you were out on tour for pretty well the full month. So tell us about that experience then.
Well, it's writers used to be able to do tours. It was a thing that happened. You'd get a publisher behind you, they'd sponsor it, and you'd go on the road for weeks or months or more. That's almost a thing of the past now, unless you're a Neil Gaiman or a John Irving or a Stephen King. If you'll do it, they're too expensive and they're too hard to coordinate. I wanted to do it anyway. And I wanted to do as much of it by train as possible because the setting for the novel is the rails. And so over the span of a month, covered about 7,500 miles, 20 odd cities, lots of events, wherever possible in smaller, out of the way towns that don't often see an author. And so that was good to be able to support local bookstores, to meet people at that level. And it was just a great deal of fun. It was exhausting, but it
Sounds
was
it.
really fun. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm always out reading myself to people. You know, as a performing poet, and it's I
Yes.
just love getting on stage and delivering stuff to audiences. And it's like
Yeah.
you said, for you with your reading voice, Ed, it's brilliant. I can well imagine you hypnotizing people straight away with it. So,
Well,
did you have any? I'm not going to ask what was your favorite gig reading of the month.
I think
What's the most unusual then? That's a good better answer.
Okay, well, let's see. The favorite was in a town called Galesburg, Illinois. It's not far from Chicago. It's an
Hmm.
old Rust Belt town that had
Wow.
very heavy manufacturing, and most of the manufacturing's left, but there are 100 trains a day that go through Galesburg.
Whoa.
And the woman who runs the Wordsmith Bookshop is the name of the store, reasonably new. She was from Galesburg, but had worked in Chicago and wanted to help revitalize the downtown. So she opened a bookstore in this downtown old, yeah. And so many people were familiar with the rails and had worked for the railroad that they did a great story in the newspaper. They did a great interview on the radio station, a wonderful turnout in
Wow.
this store. And most of the folks had a background with the rails. And my favorite exchange was an old couple, probably in their 80s. He had worked for the railroads most of his life. She had fed hobos from her back door. They basically came early, stayed late, and when they got up to leave, they came up and took my hand and said, "Now, Ed, the next time you're in town, you come stay with us."
Oh wow.
And so that's just as special as it gets.
Oh my God, yeah, completely. It's
Yeah.
I think sometimes you're doing that sort of thing. I found this when I go out reading my poetry books sometimes it's you've got more memories of actually afterwards of actually
Yes.
going out and tour and reading out than actually writing the book sometimes. That's why. So
Yeah.
it does mean a lot that straight away. Now, wrapping up now, so I want to give you a chance to read an extract of your book for us. But
Sure.
a couple of questions to wrap up with. So I know you've said that you're obviously working on other manuscripts at the moment, I'm presuming.
Right.
So,
Oh, yes.
what plans do you have going forward for your creativity?
Well, the great editor that I came together with that I told you about, he and I finished 3 years ago a book called Four in Stone, which is a lot like Steinbeck's East of Eden in terms of the same type of book.
Hmm.
And we're now in the process of working on the sequel to it. We also finished a collection of short stories, about 16 short stories, all that take place in a small Northern California town. Uh,
Oh, brilliant,
yeah,
brilliant,
so I'm deeply
brilliant,
immersed in that. Yeah.
brilliant. Now, obviously, I'm going to ask you then, obviously, very general in this one, because I've not read either of these other two books. But in
Right.
relation to these short stories, one coming up, man, because I always find writing in short stories to novels is a completely different medium.
Yes.
So, how has that been for you so far then?
Well, it's an entirely different discipline. In some ways, it's more fun because you're constrained by the length. If you want to get a short story published, it can't be much longer than 3,500 words. And so, whatever story you're going to tell, you have to do in that length of time. Unlike with a novel, you can relax, you can sort of breathe your way into it, you can take your time. So, I like that. It really requires an economy of language. Hemingway is a great guide for that. It's
Yeah, oh yeah,
essentially,
brilliant writer.
why use 50 words when five will do? It's
I'm like that with poetry where I often believe, why write a 20-line poem? I can do it in four, and I do. So I know exactly what you mean there with that. So
exactly exactly so.
brilliant. Do you have any ideas when these two books are going to be coming out yet, and all? Is that
Look,
to be
looking
sorted
for
out?
looking for an agent right now. I first started trying to write professionally in the
Hmm.
1980s, and I had an agent. It was an entirely different landscape then. You know, there were still traditional publishers and lots
Hmm.
of them. It was reasonably easy to get an agent. That's entirely different now. So I'm looking hard to get an agent so we can hopefully find a home in one of the big five publishing houses for this series of books.
Well, good luck. Keep us informed, okay? Definitely on that one, mate. So love
Will
to have
do.
you on again to talk about that book, definitely. So now
That'd be great.
we'll let you do as item as the hard sell now. So okay.
Oh,
If people want to get hold of the book, where do you recommend they go?
anywhere books are sold, of course. But for your readers, your listeners, Amazon's probably the easiest. I think there is a UK version of bookshop.org. I believe there is, or one in the EU. And I really try to support them. Sales made through them benefit local booksellers, which I think is quite important. So if you can go to bookshop.org or bookshop UK, you can order it there. Of course, you can get it in any flavor from Amazon. Amazon, all of us who are writers have a love-hate relationship with Amazon. It makes it
Oh,
easy for our
you have
work to
to.
get out there. But Lord, they've changed the landscape in publishing so much, and not always in a good way.
Yeah, and I do agree with you completely with that. Now you've also got your own website as well, haven't you? Where people want to come and read up on you about your own website. So
Yes,
where's your website? I'll let you tell people.
it's yeah, okay. So www.eddavisbooks.com, and that's eddavisbooks.com. And there's a lot of good information there. The blog has a lot of coverage about sort of section by section of the book tour, which is quite fun. It's a sort of an interesting way to explore the country, since I did most of it on trains.
What we do,
You
we
know,
like typing them on your phone with you then on the train, or is it like a tablet you're
oh,
doing it on?
I was writing the whole time. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
definitely brilliant. Okay, what we'll do, mate, we'll wrap up this bit for you now, mate. So I want to get you to do a bit of reading for us. So it's been a pleasure
sure.
today. I've really enjoyed this. It's been fantastic fun, mate. So we
Oh
shall
yeah, really fun.
we shall be back in two shakes of the dice, guys. Come back, definitely, please.
Okay, so you like me to read us
Oh, hang
next?
on, Ed. One sec. I've got to stop. I'll pause the podcast for you, mate.
Okay, good, good,
One
good,
sec.
good.
We'll see you in a minute, guys. Seriously.